Section 4 of The American Crisis by Thomas Paine. The Crisis, number 3, in the Progress of Politics, Part 2, published Philadelphia, April 19, 1777. I find it impossible, in the small compass I am limited to trace out the progress which independence has made on the minds of the different classes of men, and the several reasons by which they were moved. With some, it was a passionate abhorrence against the King of England and his ministry, as a set of savages and brutes. These men, governed by the agony of a wounded mind, were for trusting everything to hope in heaven, and bidding defiance at once. With others, it was a growing conviction that the scheme of the British court was to create, ferment, and drive on a quarrel for the sake of confiscated plunder. And men of this class ripened into independence in proportion as the evidence increased, while a third class conceived it was the true interest of America, internally and externally, to be her own master, and gave their support to independence step by step as they saw her abilities to maintain it enlarge. With many it was a compound of all these reasons, while those who were too callous to be reached by either remained and still remain Tories. The legal necessity of being independent, with several collateral reasons, is pointed out in an elegant masterly manner in a charge to the grand jury for the district of Charleston, by the Honorable William Henry Drayton, Chief Justice of South Carolina, April 23, 1776. This performance and the address of the Convention of New York are pieces, in my humble opinion, of the first rank in America. The principal causes why independence has not been so universally supported as it ought are fear and indolence, and the causes why it has been opposed are avarice, downright villainy, and the lust for personal power. There is not such a being in America as a Tory from conscience. Some secret defect or other is interwoven in the character of all those, be they men or women, who can look with patience on the brutality, luxury, and debauchery of the British court, and the violations of their army here. A woman's virtue must sit very lightly on her who can even hint a favorable sentiment in their behalf. It is remarkable that the whole race of prostitutes in New York were Tories, and the schemes for supporting the Tory cause in this city, for which several are now in jail and one hanged, were concerted and carried on in common bawdy houses, assisted by those who kept them. The connection between vice and meanness is a fit subject for satire, but when the satire is a fact, it cuts with the irresistible power of a diamond. If a Quaker, in defense of his just rights, his property, and the chastity of his house, takes up a musket, he is expelled the meeting. But the present King of England, who seduced and took into keeping a sister of their society, is reverenced and supported by repeated testimonies, while the friendly noodle from whom she was taken, and who is now in this city, continues a drudge in the service of his rival, as if proud of being cuckolded by a creature called a king. Our support and success depend on such a variety of men and circumstances, that every one who does but wish well is of some use. There are men who have a strange aversion to arms, yet have hearts to risk every shilling in the cause, or in support of those who have better talents for defending it. Nature, in the arrangement of mankind, has fitted some for every service in life. Were all soldiers, all would starve and go naked. Were none soldiers, all would be slaves. As disaffection to independence is the badge of a Tory, so affection to it is the mark of a Whig, and the differing services of the Whigs, down from those who nobly contribute everything to those who have nothing to render but their wishes, tend all to the same centre, though with different degrees of merit and ability. The larger we make the circle, the more we shall harmonize, and the stronger we shall be. All we want to shut out is disaffection, and that excluded, we must accept from each other such duties as we are best fitted to bestow. A narrow system of politics, like a narrow system of religion, is calculated only to sour the temper and be at variance with mankind. All we want to know in America is simply this: who is for independence and who is not? Those who are for it will support it, and the remainder will undoubtedly see the reasonableness of paying the charges, while those who oppose or seek to betray it must expect the more rigid fate of the jail and the gibbet. There is a kind of bastard generosity, which being extended to all men is as fatal to society on one hand as the want of true generosity is on the other. A lax manner of administering justice, falsely termed moderation, has a tendency both to dispirit public virtue and promote the growth of public evils. Had the late Committee of Safety taken cognizance of the last testimony of the Quakers, and proceeded against such delinquents as were concerned therein, they had probably prevented the treasonable plans which have been concerted since. When one villain is suffered to escape, it encourages another to proceed, either from a hope of escaping likewise, or an apprehension that we dare not punish. It has been a matter of general surprise that no notice was taken of the incendiary publication of the Quakers of the 20th of November last, a publication evidently intended to promote sedition and treason and encourage the enemy, who were then within a day's march of this city, to proceed on and possess it. Here I present the reader with a memorial which was laid before the Board of Safety a few days after the testimony appeared. Not a member of that board that I conversed with but expressed the highest detestation of the perverted principles and conduct of the Quaker junta, and a wish that the board would take the matter up, notwithstanding which it was suffered to pass away unnoticed to the encouragement of new acts of treason, the general danger of the cause, and the disgrace of the state. Quote, "To the Honorable the Council of Safety of the State of Pennsylvania." End quote. At a meeting of a reputable number of the inhabitants of the city of Philadelphia, impressed with a proper sense of the justice of the cause which this continent is engaged in, and animated with a generous fervor for supporting the same, it was resolved that the following be laid before the Board of Safety. Quote, "We profess liberality of sentiment to all men, with this distinction only, that those who do not deserve it would become wise and seek to deserve it. We hold the pure doctrines of universal liberty of conscience, and conceive it our duty to endeavor to secure that sacred right to others, as well as to defend it for ourselves. For we undertake not to judge of the religious rectitude of tenets, but leave the whole matter to him who made us. We persecute no man, neither will we abet in the persecution of any man for religion's sake. Our common relation to others being that of fellow citizens and fellow subjects of one single community. And in this line of connection we hold out the right hand of fellowship to all men. But we should conceive ourselves to be unworthy members of the free and independent states of America, were we unconcernedly to see or suffer any treasonable wound, public or private, directly or indirectly, to be given against the peace and safety of the same. We inquire not into the rank of the offenders, nor into their religious persuasion. We have no business with either, our part being only to find them out and exhibit them to justice. A printed paper, dated the 20th of November, and signed John Pemberton, whom we suppose to be an inhabitant of this city, has lately been dispersed abroad, a copy of which accompanies this. Had the framers and publishers of that paper conceived it their duty to exhort the youth and others of their society to a patient submission under the present trying visitations, and humbly to wait the event of heaven towards them, they had therein shown a Christian temper, and we had been silent. But the anger and political virulence with which their instructions are given, and the abuse with which they stigmatize all ranks of men not thinking like themselves, leave no doubt on our minds from what spirit their publication proceeded. And it is disgraceful to the pure cause of truth that men can dally with words of the most sacred import, and play them off as mechanically as if religion consisted only in contrivance. We know of no instance in which the Quakers have been compelled to bear arms, or to do anything which might strain their conscience. Wherefore their advice to withstand and refuse to submit to the arbitrary instructions and ordinances of men appeared to us a false alarm, and could only be treasonably calculated to gain favour with our enemies when they are seemingly on the brink of invading this state, or, what is still worse, to weaken the hands of our defence, that their entrance into this city might be made practicable and easy. We disclaim all tumult and disorder in the punishment of offenders, and wish to be governed not by temper but by reason in the manner of treating them. We are sensible that our cause has suffered by the two following errors: first, by ill-judged lenity to traitorous persons in some cases; and secondly, by only a passionate treatment of them in others. For the future we disown both, and wish to be steady in our proceedings and serious in our punishments. Every state in America has, by the repeated voice of its inhabitants, directed and authorized the Continental Congress to publish a formal declaration of independence of and separation from the oppressive King and Parliament of Great Britain; and we look on every man as an enemy who does not in some line or other give his assistance towards supporting the same. At the same time we consider the offence to be heightened to a degree of unpardonable guilt when such persons, under the show of religion, endeavour, either by writing, speaking, or otherwise, to subvert, overturn, or bring reproach upon the independence of this continent as declared by Congress. The publishers of the paper signed John Pemberton have called in a loud manner to their friends and connections to withstand or refuse obedience to whatever instructions or ordinances may be published, not warranted by what they call that happy constitution under which they and others have long enjoyed tranquillity and peace. If this be not treason, we know not what may properly be called by that name. To us it is a matter of surprise and astonishment that men with the word peace, peace continually on their lips, should be so fond of living under and supporting a government, and at the same time calling it happy, which is never better pleased than when a war, that has filled India with carnage and famine, Africa with slavery, and tampered with Indians and Negroes to cut the throats of the free men of America. We conceive it a disgrace to this state to harbour or wink at such palpable hypocrisy. But as we seek not to hurt the hair of any man's head when we can make ourselves safe without, we wish such persons to restore peace to themselves and us by removing themselves to some part of the King of Great Britain's dominions, as by that means they may live unmolested by us and we by them. For our fixed opinion is, that those who do not deserve a place among us ought not to have one. We conclude with requesting the Council of Safety to take into consideration the paper signed John Pemberton, and if it shall appear to them to be of a dangerous tendency or of a treasonable nature, that they would commit the signer, together with such other persons as they can discover were concerned therein, into custody until such time as some mode of trial shall ascertain the full degree of their guilt and punishment. In the doing of which we wish their judges, whoever they may be, to disregard the man, his connections, interests, riches, poverty, or principles of religion, and to attend to the nature of his offence only." The most cavilling sectarian cannot accuse the foregoing with containing the least ingredient of persecution. The free spirit on which the American cause is founded disdains to mix with such an impurity, and leaves it as rubbish fit only for narrow and suspicious minds to grovel in. Suspicion and persecution are weeds of the same dunghill, and flourish together. Had the Quakers minded their religion and their business, they might have lived through this dispute in enviable ease, and none would have molested them. The common phrase with these people is, "Our principles are peace," to which may be replied, "And your practices are the reverse." For never did the conduct of men oppose their own doctrine more notoriously than the present race of the Quakers. They have artfully changed themselves into a different sort of people to what they used to be, and yet have the address to persuade each other that they are not altered. Like antiquated virgins, they see not the havoc deformity has made upon them, but pleasantly mistaking wrinkles for dimples, conceive themselves yet lovely, and wonder at the stupid world for not admiring them. Did no injury arise to the public by this apostasy of the Quakers from themselves, the public would have nothing to do with it. But as both the design and consequences are pointed against a cause in which the whole community are interested, it is therefore no longer a subject confined to the cognizance of the meeting only, but comes as a matter of criminality before the authority either of the particular state in which it is acted, or of the continent against which it operates. Every attempt now to support the authority of the King and Parliament of Great Britain over America is treason against every state. Therefore it is impossible that any one can pardon or screen from punishment an offender against all. But to proceed. While the infatuated Tories of this and other states were last spring talking of commissioners, accommodation, making the matter up, and the Lord knows what stuff and nonsense, their good king and ministry were glutting themselves with the revenge of reducing America to unconditional submission, and solacing each other with the certainty of conquering it in one campaign. The following quotations are from the Parliamentary Register of the debates of the House of Lords, March 5th, 1776. Quote, "The Americans, says Lord Talbot, steward of the king's household, have been obstinate, undutiful, and ungovernable from the very beginning, from their first early and infant settlements, and I am every day more and more convinced that this people never will be brought back to their duty and the subordinate relation they stand in to this country, till reduced to unconditional, effectual submission. No concession on our part, no lenity, no endurance will have any other effect but that of increasing their insolence." Quote, "The struggle," says Lord Townshend, formerly General Townshend at Quebec, and the late Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, "is now a struggle for power. The die is cast, and the only point which now remains to be determined is, in what manner the war can be most effectually prosecuted and speedily finished, in order to procure that unconditional submission which has been so ably stated by the noble Earl with the white staff," meaning Lord Talbot. "And I have no reason to doubt that the measures now pursuing will put an end to the war in the course of a single campaign. Should it linger longer, we shall then have reason to expect that some foreign power will interfere and take advantage of our domestic troubles and civil distractions." Lord Lyttelton, quote, "My sentiments are pretty well known. I shall only observe now that lenient measures have had no other effect than to produce insult after insult; that the more we conceded, the higher America rose in her demands, and the more insolent she has grown. It is for this reason that I am now for the most effective and decisive measures, and am of opinion that no alternative is left us but to relinquish America forever, or finally determine to compel her to acknowledge the legislative authority of this country. And it is the principle of an unconditional submission I would be for maintaining." Can words be more expressive than these? Surely the Tories will believe the Tory lords. The truth is they do believe them, and know as fully as any Whig on the continent knows that the king and ministry never had the least design of an accommodation with America, but an absolute unconditional conquest. And the part which the Tories were to act was, by downright lying, to endeavour to put the continent off its guard, and to divide and sow discontent in the minds of such Whigs as they might gain an influence over. In short, to keep up a distraction here, that the force sent from England might be able to conquer in one campaign. They and the ministry were, by a different game, playing into each other's hands. The cry of the Tories in England was no reconciliation, no accommodation, in order to obtain the greater military force; while those in America were crying nothing but reconciliation and accommodation, that the force sent might conquer with less resistance. But this single campaign is over, and America not conquered. The whole work is yet to do, and the force much less to do it with. Their condition is both despicable and deplorable, out of cash, out of heart, and out of hope. A country furnished with arms and ammunition as America now is, with 3 millions of inhabitants, and 3,000 miles distant from the nearest enemy that can approach her, is able to look and laugh them in the face. Howe appears to have two objects in view, either to go up the North River or to come to Philadelphia. By going up the North River he secures a retreat for his army through Canada, but the ships must return, if they return at all, the same way they went. As our army would be in the rear, the safety of their passage down is a doubtful matter. By such a motion he shuts himself from all supplies from Europe but through Canada, and exposes his army and navy to the danger of perishing. The idea of his cutting off the communication between the eastern and southern states by means of the North River is merely visionary. He cannot do it by his shipping, because no ship can lay long at anchor in any river within the reach of the shore. A single gun would drive a first rate from such a station. This was fully proved last October at Forts Washington and Lee, where one gun only on each side of the river obliged 2 frigates to cut and be towed off in an hour's time. Neither can he cut it off by his army, because the several posts they must occupy would divide them almost to nothing, and expose them to be picked up by ours like pebbles on a river's bank. But admitting that he could, where is the injury? Because while his whole force is cantoned out as sentries over the water, they will be very innocently deployed, and the moment they march into the country the communication opens. The most probable object is Philadelphia, and the reasons are many. Howe's business is to conquer it, and in proportion as he finds himself unable to the task, he will employ his strength to distress women and weak minds, in order to accomplish through their fears what he cannot accomplish by his own force. His coming or attempting to come to Philadelphia is a circumstance that proves his weakness, for no general that felt himself able to take the field and attack his antagonist would think of bringing his army into a city in the summertime. And this mere shifting the scene from place to place without effecting anything has feebleness and cowardice on the face of it, and holds him up in a contemptible light to all who can reason justly and firmly. By several informations from New York, it appears that their army in general, both officers and men, have given up the expectation of conquering America. Their eye now is fixed upon the spoil. They suppose Philadelphia to be rich with stores, and as they think to get more by robbing a town than by attacking an army, their movement toward the city is probable. We are not now contending against an army of soldiers, but against a band of thieves, who had rather plunder than fight, and have no other hope of conquest than by cruelty. They expect to get a mighty booty, and strike another general panic by making a sudden movement and getting possession of this city. But unless they can march out as well as in, or get the entire command of the river to remove off their plunder, they may probably be stopped with the stolen goods upon them. They have never yet succeeded whenever they have been opposed, but at Fort Washington. At Charleston their defeat was effectual. At Ticonderoga they ran away. At every skirmish at Kingsbridge and the White Plains they were obliged to retreat, and the instant that our arms were turned upon them in the Jerseys, they turned likewise, and those that turned not were taken. The necessity of always fitting our internal police to the circumstances of the times we live in is something so strikingly obvious that no sufficient objection can be made against it. The safety of all societies depends upon it, and where this point is not attended to, the consequences will either be a general languor or a tumult. The encouragement and protection of the good subjects of any state, and the suppression and punishment of bad ones, are principal objects for which all authority is instituted, and the line in which it ought to operate. We have in this city a strange variety of men and characters, and the circumstances of the times require that they should be publicly known. It is not the number of Tories that hurt us, so much as the not finding out who they are. Men must now take one side or the other, and abide by the consequences. The Quakers, trusting to their short-sighted sagacity, have, most unluckily for them, made their declaration and their last testimony, and we ought now to take them at their word. They have involuntarily read themselves out of the Continental meeting, and cannot hope to be restored to it again but by payment and penitence. Men whose political principles are founded on avarice are beyond the reach of reason, and the only cure of Toryism of this cast is to tax it. A substantial good drawn from a real evil is of the same benefit to society as if drawn from a virtue; and where men have not public spirit to render themselves serviceable, it ought to be the study of government to draw the best use possible from their vices. When the governing passion of any man or set of men is once known, the method of managing them is easy; for even misers, whom no public virtue can impress, would become generous could a heavy tax be laid upon covetousness. The Tories have endeavoured to insure their property with the enemy by forfeiting their reputation with us, from which may be justly inferred that their governing passion is avarice. Make them as much afraid of losing on one side as on the other, and you stagger their Toryism. Make them more so, and you reclaim them, for their principle is to worship the power which they are most afraid of. This method of considering men and things together opens into a large field for speculation, and affords me an opportunity of offering some observations on the state of our currency, so as to make the support of it go hand in hand with the suppression of disaffection and the encouragement of public spirit. The thing which first presents itself in inspecting the state of the currency is, that we have too much of it, and that there is a necessity of reducing the quantity in order to increase the value. Men are daily growing poor by the very means that they take to get rich; for in the same proportion that the prices of all goods on hand are raised, the value of all money laid by is reduced. A simple case will make this clear. Let a man have £100 in cash, and as many goods on hand as will today sell for £20. But, not content with the present market price, he raises them to £40, and by so doing obliges others in their own defense to raise cent per cent likewise. In this case it is evident that his £100 laid by is reduced £50 in value; whereas, had the market lowered cent per cent, his goods would have sold but for 10, but his £100 would have risen in value to 200, because it would then purchase as many goods again, or support his family as long again as before. And strange as it may seem, he is £150 the poorer for raising his goods to what he would have been had he lowered them, because the £40 which his goods sold for is, by the general rise of the market cent per cent, rendered of no more value than the £10 would be had the market fallen in the same proportion; and consequently the whole difference of gain or loss is on the difference in value of the £100 laid by, viz. from 50 to 200. This rage for raising goods is, for several reasons, much more the fault of the Tories than the Whigs; and yet the Tories, to their shame and confusion ought they to be told of it, are by far the most noisy and discontented. The greatest part of the Whigs, by being now either in the army or employed in some public service, are buyers only, and not sellers; and as this evil has its origin in trade, it cannot be charged on those who are out of it. But the grievance has now become too general to be remedied by partial methods, and the only effectual cure is to reduce the quantity of money. With half the quantity we should be richer than we are now, because the value of it would be doubled, and consequently our attachment to it increased. For it is not the number of dollars that a man has, but how far they will go, that makes him either rich or poor. These two points being admitted, viz. that the quantity of money is too great, and that the prices of goods can only be effectually reduced by reducing the quantity of money, the next point to be considered is the method of how to reduce it. The circumstances of the times, as before observed, require that the public characters of all men should now be fully understood, and the only general method of ascertaining it is by an oath or affirmation, renouncing all allegiance to the King of Great Britain, and to support the independence of the United States as declared by Congress. Let at the same time a tax of 10, 15, or 20 per cent per annum, to be collected quarterly, be levied on all property. These alternatives, by being perfectly voluntary, will take in all sorts of people. Here is the test, here is the tax. He who takes the former conscientiously proves his affection to the cause, and binds himself to pay his quota by the best services in his power, and is thereby justly exempt from the latter; and those who choose the latter pay their quota in money to be excused from the former, or rather it is the price paid to us for their supposed though mistaken insurance with the enemy. But this is only a part of the advantage which would arise by knowing the different characters of men. The Whigs stake everything on the issue of their arms, while the Tories, by their disaffection, are sapping and undermining their strength; and, of consequence, the property of the Whigs is the more exposed thereby, and whatever injury their estates may sustain by the movements of the enemy must either be borne by themselves, who have done everything which has yet been done, or by the Tories, who have not only done nothing, but have, by their disaffection, invited the enemy on. In the present crisis we ought to know, square by square and house by house, who are in real allegiance with the United Independent States, and who are not. Let but the line be made clear and distinct, and all men will then know what they are to trust to. It would not only be good policy, but strict justice, to raise 50 or 100,000 pounds or more, if it is necessary, out of the estates and property of the King of England's votaries resident in Philadelphia, to be distributed as a reward to those inhabitants of the city and state who should turn out and repulse the enemy, should they attempt to march this way; and likewise to bind the property of all such persons to make good the damages which that of the Whigs might sustain. In the indistinguishable mode of conducting war, we frequently make reprisals at sea on the vessels of persons in England who are friends to our cause compared with the resident Tories among us. In every former publication of mine, from Common Sense down to the last crisis, I have generally gone on the charitable supposition that the Tories were rather a mistaken than a criminal people, and have applied argument after argument with all the candour and temper which I was capable of, in order to set every part of the case clearly and fairly before them, and if possible to reclaim them from ruin to reason. I have done my duty by them, and have now done with that doctrine, taking it for granted that those who yet hold their disaffection are either a set of avaricious miscreants who would sacrifice the continent to save themselves, or a banditti of hungry traitors who are hoping for a division of the spoil, to which may be added a list of crown or proprietary dependents who, rather than go without a portion of power, would be content to share it with the devil. Of such men there is no hope, and their obedience will only be according to the danger set before them and the power that is exercised over them. A time will shortly arrive in which, by ascertaining the characters of persons now, we shall be guarded against their mischiefs then; for in proportion as the enemy despair of conquest, they will be trying the arts of seduction and the force of fear by all the mischiefs which they can inflict. But in war we may be certain of these two things, viz., that cruelty in an enemy and motions made with more than usual parade are always signs of weakness. He that can conquer finds his mind too free and pleasant to be brutish, and he that intends to conquer never makes too much show of his strength. We now know the enemy we have to do with. While drunk with the certainty of victory, they disdain to be civil, and in proportion as disappointment makes them sober, and their apprehensions of a European war alarm them, they will become cringing and artful. Honest they cannot be. But our answer to them, in either condition they may be in, is short and full. As free and independent states we are willing to make peace with you tomorrow, but we neither can hear nor reply in any other character. If Britain cannot conquer us, it proves she is neither able to govern nor protect us, and our particular situation now is such that any connection with her would be unwisely exchanging a half-defeated enemy for two powerful ones. Europe, by every appearance, is now on the eve, nay, on the morning twilight of a war, and any alliance with George III brings France and Spain upon our backs. A separation from him attaches them to our side. Therefore the only road to peace, honor, and commerce is independence. Written this 4th year of the Union, which God preserve. Signed, Common Sense. End of the Crisis, Number 3, Part 2, by Thomas Paine.